Yeah, so I started out kind of post attempting a playing career. So I played as a youth player up till 18 and wasn't good enough to make it. Ended up going to university in Liverpool, to John Moores University, to study science and football, and then started to get more into the kind of the outside of the playing part of things. So coaching initially, and then that kind of rolled into some analysis work as well as coaching, kind of a little bit of a hybrid role. Part of the modules at university were linked with local clubs, so there's a bit of coaching at Tranmere Rovers, along with some other things, and then ended up working at Blackburn's Academy part-time for a season, coaching and delivering the analysis for the under-18s. Very different industry to what it is now, in terms of the technology, the kind of the things that we would be working with then and now are very, very different. From there, I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to move to Qatar, to Doha, to work for Aspire Academy. Same kind of thing, but less coaching, much more about the analysis. So working with the youth teams within Aspire Academy, working with the youth national teams, because there's a really close link between the federation and obviously the sports academy there. And that went on for a number of years. Ended up doing more with the national teams towards the end of my time there. Ended up working with the under 17s, 19s, and then with the senior team. So working on qualifiers, which would have been for 2014, I believe. I think that's right. Sounds all right. And then did a year at a club in Qatar as well. So a slightly different experience. And then coming back to the UK, to Wolves initially with the under-23s, as head of academy analysis. And then there was a bit of a staffing changeover when Nuno Espirito Santo took over as first team manager. So ended up working with the first team with him and his staff for 4 years as kind of the lead analyst. So predominantly with the opposition, and the pre-match analysis, but kind of doing match days, elements of post-match, working within training as well, along with the other guys on the analysis team. And then a couple of years ago, it took over the lead of the department, which allowed me to take a little bit of a step back from match days. So don't work with the coaching staff on a match day. We have a team of analysts who do that. So my role is a bit more overseeing and management of the department, working with the first team, with the academies, to ensure there's some alignment, and also then kind of future-proofing what we do from a technology, software, hardware point of view, as well. So speaking to companies and looking at what's coming next.
What's kind of your, obviously now you're the head of performance insights and data strategy at Wolves, I think is your official title. And you used to be an analyst, so kind of on the ground, but what's your day-to-day look like these days?
Yeah, so it varies week to week, really, what we're looking at, depending on what time of the season we're at. So I do a lot of work with our methodology analyst, which is probably more of the insights. So looking at how do we measure and assess how we play as a club, what is our playing philosophy, putting evidence behind that. So we do a lot of work with that, try and integrate across different departments. So what are we doing in analysis that maybe has a crossover with recruitment, try and make sure those processes align, to working with the sporting director quite closely or things like that, working with our performance department and trying to centralise different workflows and make sure there's alignment across different disciplines and different departments from academy through to first team. So it's quite a varied week to week in terms of what's coming up. So some weeks it'll be meetings with different departments and different staff. Other weeks it'll be more kind of meeting with external providers about what we want to do. Contracts this time of year, there's a lot of that obviously going in towards the kind of the budget time of year with the summer, where we're looking at what softwares, what event data providers, what are we going to be using for the next season or two.
I was going to say, Matt, do you try and integrate the technology for, all the way down through the under nines? Is it typically you might get stuff in silos for the first team versus the academy?
We try and avoid it being in silos unnecessarily. So if it's something we feel that adds value to the academy, we'll always try and integrate the two. We're on the same site, which helps us that. Two separate buildings, but we're on one site as a training ground. So we have obviously daily access to the same facilities, if you like. So where we think there's value, we'll align it. What we try and do from a club, and predominantly analysis point of view, from what I do, is make sure that there's stepping stones as they move up the age groups, whether that be technology, access to information, kind of how we deliver it, the visuals we do with it. But there's always a core element and alignment within that. So the messages are the same. They might just be delivered in an age-appropriate fashion, or actually start layering on information as they go through. But in terms of the technology and the stuff that we use, we do align it throughout the club. It's just used in obviously age-appropriate ways as you move down throughout the academy. And there's some things that would be first team only, just because of the nature of what it is. if we then think there's value for pushing that down. So an example would be our event data provider. For the first team, we use with the 21s and 18s as well. We don't go any younger than that with them as it stands, but we have consistency across team and individual event data from the 18s up to the first team, so we can do similar kind of workflows, try and replicate and mirror as much as we can. As they get younger, we don't do it the same way. We're a little bit more subjective coding through the software that we use, but also then start layering on some objective evidence as well based on what we want to collect as a club for the younger age groups.
We have a video with you, Matt, and you're featured prominently in it. And so I wanted to move a little bit to Spiideo and dive a little bit deeper because this format allows for it, I guess. But maybe you could walk us through how Spiideo fits into those workflows you were just talking about, and how you guys use it and what tools you connect and how the information flows from either the first team, or it could be an academy team or anything like that.
Yeah, so I think predominantly what it's allowed us to do, and we've been looking at a system such as that for a while, and we always knew from our department what the value it would bring. It was then obviously trying to sell that to the people who signed the checks, and we were lucky enough that the club backed it and the manager wanted it to be put in place. So initially we did it from a first team training pitch point of view. What we wanted to do, and the reason we wanted to do it, was to try and get away from manual filming where it wasn't necessary. And we felt that the technology had moved on that would allow us to do that, to get away from having someone stood on a gantry with an umbrella, with two cameras, struggling to film because of the weather, the rain, etc. And once we had it in place, we could showcase the value and the benefit. And we've now rolled that out to the academy pitches as well. So our 4 main grass pitches are covered. We have the indoor arena, which is covered fairly recently. And we've also got it in the stadium where our under-21s will play, and obviously to cover them for a match day as well. So what essentially we say, we allow ourselves to cover the whole pitch and the whole area, which previously, obviously, as everyone knows, a manual camera, you film what you see and that's it. It allows coaches and players to interact with things off the ball to a much greater detail. So goalkeeper coach can always see what his goalkeeper's doing. Defenders can zoom in on back lines. And it's massively streamlined our process in terms of how quickly we can do work on the training sessions themselves. So we can do a lot more live coding than we could before. So essentially our training analyst with the first team will have it set up in the office, the feed coming in. He'll then be coding that and breaking it down to what we want to see and what the coaches would want to see post-training for individuals on a team basis. And it's pretty much immediate. It takes a little bit of time to download the session to then put it into the software to distribute, but essentially it's a much more seamless process. Obviously, we have since then rolled that out onto a number of pitches, so we're probably at 80% coverage in terms of our training facility now. And it just makes everyone's life easier. It makes everyone's life a little bit more comfortable from an analyst point of view, and far more effective in terms of what they can do. They're not losing 2 hours a day filming, which they would have previously. And we want to try and film as much as we can to do any kind of live or retrospective analysis. Before that, it was much more difficult to do that from manpower and time.
Do you give like all the training sessions and basically all of the footage to the players, or are you kind of like picking and choosing certain things that they can and cannot see?
It'll differ depending on what the team. It's a little bit more controlled by the management from the first team point of view, that he's very focused and he'll take bits from training that he wants them to see. And that'll then kind of feed into the pre or post match analysis as well, where there's elements of game plan, orientated training within that. All the coaches will have access to all the sessions. The academy, we will give them access, so the sessions will go online and they can then obviously review that in their own time as well. So we encourage the players to take ownership and responsibility of their own analysis. So they're pushed to kind of go and do that themselves, whether it be training or from games. They'll all have individual learning plans. There'll be examples from training, there'll be examples from games, that they can build their own playlist online here in the building or anywhere they want to do it, from their phones or the iPads or their own laptops. So we do encourage that, so they would have access to it. It's something we like to see them do. I say it differs depending on where they are in their development journey and what the end goal is, I guess, for the team.
Obviously, with matches, it's pretty clear what you're looking for and what you're analyzing and things like that. But you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I was curious, what like specifically are you guys looking for in training? Are there data points that you're looking at? Is it like, obviously sometimes there's scrimmages, but there's drills and things like that. Is there anything specific, like from the training aspect, that you're capturing and coding all this video that you're looking for?
We tend to look at it from probably a little bit more of a subjective when it comes to the video from training. We work off a game model, our principles of play. So it'll be kind of using it for training when there's examples of that, because then we can use that for best practice for the academy in terms of what the team's trying to achieve and what that looks like in a training session, and then matched up with when it happens in a game. So you can see the progression from training to game to obviously to outcome. So it's less probably data points related and more, like I said, we'll look at it from a subjective video point of view. And then obviously examples of the manager from a first team point of view, that he'll have his game plan for the opposition that's coming up for the weekend, find some examples of where that's been executed in training really well. He'll then kind of use that to reinforce that message as it gets closer to the match itself as well. So then we'll start blending that video in to the opposition data and the opposition, obviously, footage as well.
With your philosophy and kind of the principles of play, are you showing typically maybe first team stuff to the younger age groups? Like, so is it, they're actually watching stuff from the first team?
Yeah, so we build a best practice library off the back of that. So it becomes, I guess, a guide and educational tool for the academy coaches and players. So it's not necessarily directing the academy teams on how to play. It's providing some evidence and showcasing what the principles of this manager are. So essentially we're trying to help, especially the 21s and 18s, bridge the gap a little bit. So if they get called up to train with the manager, they already know what his principles would be and what they look like. So they've got the evidence behind that and they've got awareness of it. So it's not a surprise if and when they do get asked to train with the first team, which we do quite a lot here. So it's a kind of a dual purpose in that we'll do it, we'll build a document that visualizes that, but also we can then build custom metrics to kind of assess the principles in action. And then we'll layer on the video, so essentially best practice examples of that happening in games. So if we want to show an under-16 centre-back, best practice of one of our centre-backs stepping in and breaking lines, we've got a catalogue already built, so we can say, look, this is what it looks like from a first team point of view. If you get close to the first team, these are the things you'll be asked to do. Now's your chance to start putting it into your game now and using that as an educational tool for the players as well.
What do the coaches want out of that? Your team, the analysts?
Essentially, they want us to answer, I guess, questions before they have them. That's how we kind of look at it, is that especially from an opposition, from a first team point of view, we want to try and answer every question they've got before they get a chance to ask it. So our opportunity is to present the information on the opposition as tailored and customised to us as possible. And that's the challenge for the analysts, to do that in a time-efficient manner. And there's a huge amount of information in the Premier League. We're very lucky to be in the Premier League and have access to as much information as we do. The challenge for us is to then turn that information into insights that actually matter. So what information can we create insights out of that actually going to make a decision, so impact on a decision on a match day or in training, or kind of creating a training plan to then go and play against that team. And it's, again, we kind of look at it from a drip feeding process. So you kind of start the week, you'll have the bigger document, and then you start saying, we'll start narrowing it down and saying, these are the things we want to look at from this team in possession, out of possession, how it links back to how we play, how have they played against teams that play in a similar way to us, how have they played against different teams. And I guess trying to be as predictive as possible with that and say, look, we think they'll play like this because we've seen them do this. And it's always, I guess, a blend of the objective evidence with subjective expertise, which is what the analysis staff bring to the process. So you obviously have all the information, they're layering on their expertise and trying to provide the coaches with as much insight as possible to allow them to go out and create a game plan and a training session throughout the week that hopefully helps you achieve 3 points in the weekend.
AI is kind of the craze right now, and obviously Spiideo, we have like an AI autofollow, but are you leveraging AI in other ways to kind of, you just mentioned like there's this plethora of data, so how do you sift through it? Like, do you have something AI related or other methods?
Yeah, not so much AI at the minute. It's something that's definitely on our radar, and I think the technology has moved on so quick from when I started, massively so. But even in the last 3 or 4 years, with how quick the AI could be implemented into things, it seems to be accelerating all the time. So obviously the main stuff for us is we use the autofollow a lot in the cameras, which has been really good. I think compared to where that was 2 or 3 years ago, it's massively different, which it makes it much more usable for what we want to do with it. So that's in that regard. we tend to do a lot of kind of, in terms of using the data, more so bespoke custom metrics. So we use softwares that can kind of allow us to go through the data, bring it in, put it into a database, put it into a visualization tool, but it's bespoke to us. So we're not at the stage where we're using machine learning or AI for that. I think ultimately we'll get to that, and allow us hopefully to ingest more and be more predictive with it and start building some models. So it's something that's on our radar, probably not something we're not as far along the line as some clubs might be.
You have a lot of data, you have a lot of video, whether it's from training or matches, but you also have a lot of turnover in terms of players, whether it's calling an academy player up or transferring in a new player. How do you guys approach like integrating a new player into the team through video, through analysis? And what's that process look like?
Yeah, it's one that I guess it depends on the player, their preferences and how they like to receive their information. We'll always try and make the transition as seamless as possible. And we kind of go back to the playing principles document. Obviously, we have access to that. The players will see some elements of that at different times. And the manager we have now is very, very good at communicating with the players about what he wants. So there'd be no doubt that the player would sit down with him and his coaching staff, and he would explain in very clear detail about how that player would fit into how he plays. And that conversation probably starts before they actually finally sign and arrive in the building. We can then use some elements of the visuals and the video from that playing principles and best practice library to help show that. And then ultimately, some players are much more receptive to it and will come ask and say, oh, have you got my things on this? Or have we got that on this? And we'll cater for that. Other players are a little bit more, you can send them stuff and they'll take it away and kind of digest that in their own time. Some players are a little bit more, you've almost got to lead them to certain things. And the coaching staff here are really good with that. And it's quite an integrated process between the departments, and that we can help provide information to them, and then they'll kind of help that get to the players, which gives it much more weight when it comes from obviously the coaching staff as well. From an academy point of view, the same kind of thing. We've got a way of playing, and that we've got the video and some of the visuals to show that. So when a player comes in, they can almost kind of have an onboarding session, if you like. Go, this is how we play. This is what it looks like. We understand what the positional responsibilities within each phase of the game are within our model. So we can say, if we've got a centre-back, these are the things you would be expected to do. This is what it looks like. And then over time, we would build their own version of that through their learning plans for the academy.
Would you be doing team film sessions like every single day? Are you doing small, would it be more one-on-one with an iPad? Do you have like, big projector? Like, could you talk us through maybe a few of the different ways you actually consume the video?
Yeah, so we don't do it every day. Obviously, it depends on, this week's a bit quiet, especially because we've just had international break, so we haven't had anything obviously from the weekend to work on. We'll tend to probably have 2 or 3 over the course of the week from a first team point of view, and we've got a purpose-built auditorium in the training ground for that. So a big touch screen, 30 seats, kind of obviously as they go up. And the manager will use that a lot. So he usually goes in there and has 2 or 3 meetings with the whole team. Then there'll be smaller group meetings on a more of an ad hoc basis. The goalkeepers will be in there. Obviously, the coaching staff will meet in there to review the things as well before they then meet with the players. So it does get used a lot, and there's various ways that that's presented. Sometimes it'll be pushed online for them to see it in advance, and then they've obviously got eyes on the content before you actually go into the meeting. We use a lot of telestration on the video to kind of highlight the key messages and the key points that the manager and his staff want to see, which works really well, obviously, from a language perspective as well, for the players that potentially don't speak English or don't understand some of the languages. Obviously, the staff do speak. Obviously, the images in the video will paint the picture for them along with the telestration on there. From an academy point of view, there's probably a lot more smaller group unit-based activities going on. It's probably on a smaller scale, but on a more often as you go. So you're kind of working on different phases within training. You might deliver a little bit more in training. There's a lot more development orientated. There's a lot of the video meetings with the first team are either post-match or pre-match, either a feedback session. What went well? What do we think we need to improve on for the next game? Or this is what the next opposition are going to do. This is how we're going to play.
I have a question that shifts gears a little bit, because when I was researching for this conversation, I saw you had a graduate, I think, research degree in fatigue on decision making. Do you still? I just found it so interesting and wondered how it plays into your job, if it does at all, and if video plays a part in that, and data and all of the inputs that you can get on if a player is fatigued?
I mean, well, to be honest, that was a long time ago, and it wasn't actually on players; it was on referees. It was just something that came up post my undergrad degree. There was an opportunity to stay in education, but also because it was part-time, it allowed me to continue working at a couple of the clubs I was working at. So it was a little bit of not a time filler, but almost along those lines. So it was served its purpose. It was interesting. It actually was as I was first starting out with the analysis, and we used a lot of video and a lot of software to obviously get to the clips. But it was essentially looking at referees' key decisions and what they did physically in the 5 to 15 minutes previous to that, and see if there was a correlation between decisions wrong and spikes in high-speed running and things like that. So relevant in that it was using, obviously, the data linked to the video to try and kind of see if there's correlations and key outcomes, I guess. Because that's one thing that we're trying to do a lot now, is actually what metrics correlate to different things within the game. What correlates to result, what correlates to what we would class as good performance. So that was probably an intro into that to some extent, but also it was an opportunity to work with some really bright people as postgrads with LJMU, which I'm still in touch with now and still utilise that network of contacts now in that world.
What was did you find a correlation with the decision making, or no? Inconclusive?
No, there wasn't one really, which was interesting. Yeah, it was. Yeah, there was. It might be at the time. This is obviously going back. What would that have been? 2006, 2007. I don't think there was the level of granular data that you have now that might show something up a little bit more detail. I think that the physical data was pretty basic, and there's obviously a lot more access to accelerations, decelerations, HML, all the different metrics that we know are much more prevalent to acute spikes in that might affect decision making. Was at that point it was fairly kind of standard physical metrics, so there wasn't really anything that stood out. Probably also didn't use a big enough sample size. We probably would have needed to go over a much bigger sample of seasons to see if there's a correlation, because you don't probably get enough. There's not many key incidents in a particular game to really kind of get enough probably data sources.
Well, Matt, we've taken up a lot of your time. I just have one last question. Deli might have some more too, but we greatly appreciate you joining us. I kind of wanted to end. You're at the pinnacle of the industry in the Premier League. Do you have any advice for any other people looking to get into football, into analysis?
Definitely, I think probably the single most useful thing you can do is do as much as you possibly can as early as you possibly can. So I would never say no to an opportunity when I was first starting out. It was like, oh, can you go and do this with that group, or can you go and do that with that group? It might be something quite basic, just filming a session, but people remember that. And I think what some people who start out in sport probably don't realise how small a world it is. The amount of times you get a message or a phone call saying, oh, you've crossed paths with this person, what are they like? And if you always remember going, oh, they always did that a little bit extra, you remember that. So I think actually going out your way to try and do things and be as proactive as possible when you get given an opportunity is really important. I think if you just go into a place when you're first starting out and just do the bare minimum, you'll be forgotten about. I think it's the ones that really make an effort to do a little bit more when not being asked to do that. They're the ones who stand out. And also probably now is being quite broad as you start, but also trying to start thinking about where your focus is going to go. Because from my point of view, when analysis started, we would literally do everything. There'd be one person at an academy level and they would do the whole shebang. Whereas now you've got set play analysts, you've got goalkeeper analysts, you've got data analysts, you've got tactical analysts, you've got coach, tactical analysts. Understand where you think your strengths are and maximise those. It's probably not worth trying to be a jack of all trades from analysis now, because I think the discipline's moved on. So in terms of even kind of accreditation processes, they will be split into different disciplines. So have an interest in all, but try and be an expert in one.
No, it's great advice. I think it's really applicable in any field, right, of business. Really, is what it sounds like. So, last question for me, I think, would be like you touched on earlier around how things have evolved over the last few years. What do you think will have like the biggest impact in say the next like 3 to 5 years in terms like within your like specific industry?
I think it'll be the technology and the AI and how quickly people can get to maximising that. Because again, the amount of information is not going to get smaller at the highest level in football. So how you can then ingest make sense and communicate those insights from that information, it'll change how you do that. And then how you use the technology and the AI to be predictive. I think that's the next big thing. I know some clubs are doing it pretty well. It's never going to be a perfect science, but how can we get to the point that we know when we're benchmarking academy players that if they've hit a certain level at 14, there's a good chance, because we've done the research, that they're going to continue on a certain trajectory. And there'll always be stumbling blocks that you can't foresee. But how can we get better at predicting where people are going to go? How can we get better at predicting what's going to come next from a physical point of view, technical point of view, based on the information that we're collecting? And I think the AI and the technology will streamline that process and allow the subjective expertise we touched on before to come to the fore. So actually you're not spending your time being a data manipulator or collector. You're the one who's got to then provide expert opinion on the back of the evidence you get. And I think the technology will streamline that process massively. And we've seen it a huge amount over the last couple of years in the information we get and how much manual work it used to take compared to what it is now, just from the kind of say the upgrade in the technology we've got, and it becomes more affordable. So I think it'll become more widespread as well.
Definitely. Well, thanks, Matt. Thank you for taking the time. We greatly appreciate it. And your insight is invaluable.
Thanks, Matt.
No problem. Thanks, guys.